The fluorescent lights of the St. Jude's emergency department hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing tune. It was the soundtrack of 3 a.m. exhaustion, a low electric drone that vibrated in the bones of the night shift. For Harper Reed, it was just background noise. She was used to noise. Most of what she'd experienced in her 40 years on Earth had been loud. This humming was a whisper by comparison. Her hands trembled as she stalked the suture cart. It wasn't a violent shake, but a fine, persistent tremor, a vibration that started in her nerve endings and worked its way to the surface. It was a constant, unwelcome companion, a physical manifestation of memories she fought to keep buried under layers of sterile blue scrubs and a placid, unassuming expression. Reed, are you decorating that cart for Christmas, or are you going to finish it this decade? The voice, sharp and condescending, belonged to Dr. Julian Vance, head of emergency medicine, Harvard graduate, and a man whose ego was so vast it practically needed its own attending physician. He stood by the nurse's station, impeccably dressed in tailored figs, a stark contrast to the weary staff around him. His eyes, the color of cold slate, were fixed on Harper's hands. "Almost done, doctor," Harper murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lights. She kept her gaze fixed on the sterile packets of nylon thread. Dr. Vance scoffed, a sound of pure disdain. He turned to Jessica, a third-year resident who shadowed him like a pilot fish, mimicking his arrogance. "See that, Jessica? That's what happens when you hire from community college nursing programs. 40 years old and can't even stock a cart without looking like she's trying to defuse a bomb. It's a liability," Jessica giggled, a high, sycophantic sound. "Maybe we should get her some of those weighted spoons they give to Parkinson's patients, doctor." The cruelty was casual, delivered for an audience of tired nurses and techs who were too afraid of Vance's wrath to object. They just lowered their heads, pretending to be absorbed in their charts. Harper felt the familiar heat of shame rise in her cheeks, but her expression remained unchanged. She carefully placed the last packet of sutures, her movements precise despite the tremor. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive in a new environment was to become invisible. Be the gray rock, blend into the background, don't draw fire. Her limp, a slight, almost imperceptible drag of her left leg, became more pronounced as she pushed the cart back to its station. Vance noticed that too. "For God's sake, Reed, pick up the pace. This is a trauma center, not a retirement home." "Yes, doctor." She faded back into the alcove where supplies were kept, her shoulders slightly hunched. Just a ghost, she told herself, a ghost in blue scrubs. It was a mantra that had served her well. Ghosts weren't noticed. Ghosts weren't a threat. A young nursing student named Sarah intercepted her, offering a small, sympathetic smile. "Don't listen to them, Harper. They're just like that." Harper gave a slight nod, a flicker of gratitude in her tired eyes. "Noise," she whispered, "just noise." Inside, however, a different part of her was cataloging. Vance. Narcissistic, overconfident, relies on credentials, not skill. Prone to panic under pressure. Jessica. Eager to please, lacks independent thought. Follower, a weak link. It was an old habit, one forged in places far from the sterile halls of St. Jude's. Threat assessment was as natural to her as breathing. She scanned the ER layout not as a nurse, but as an operator. 2 main entrances, 1 ambulance bay. Security desk has a clear line of sight to the waiting room, but a blind spot by the trauma bays. 4 crash carts, multiple sources of improvised cover, weak points, large glass windows facing the parking lot. The night wore on, a slow drip of routine emergencies. A drunk with a head laceration, a child with a febrile seizure, an elderly woman with chest pains. Through it all, Vance and his clique of residents treated Harper like a piece of furniture. They'd talk over her, ignore her suggestions, and relegate her to the most menial tasks: cleaning rooms, taking vitals, transporting stable patients. The escalation came around 4 a.m. A complex trauma patient, a construction worker who had fallen 3 stories, was brought in. The scene was chaotic. Dr. Vance was in his element, barking orders, performing for his audience of residents and students. "I need a chest tube tray now. Nurse," he snapped, not even looking up. Harper was already there, tray in hand. She had anticipated the need the moment she saw the patient's asymmetrical chest rise. As she offered it, her hand trembled, rattling the metal instruments. Vance snatched the tray from her. "Are you trying to give me a heart attack, Reed? Get out of here. Go fetch some blankets. Try not to trip over your own feet on the way." He turned to Jessica. "You, assist me. At least I know your hands are steady." Humiliation washed over Harper, cold and bitter. She retreated, her face a blank mask. As she walked away, she heard Greg, another nurse who orbited Vance, whisper to a colleague, "I don't know why they hired her. She's a walking malpractice suit." Harper grabbed the warm blankets from the warmer, her movements stiff. She could feel their eyes on her back, their judgment like a physical weight. Her gaze drifted to the patient on the table. She saw the subtle signs Vance was missing in his theatrical performance. The slight distension of the neck veins, the faint cyanosis around his lips despite the oxygen mask. The monitor showed a steady blood pressure, but she knew it was a lie. The body was compensating, fighting a losing battle. He was developing a tension pneumothorax on the other side, a ticking time bomb. She approached Vance quietly. "Doctor," she began, her voice low. "His tracheal deviation. It looks like it's shifting to the left. We should check the right side." Vance didn't even look at her. He was busy skillfully inserting the chest tube, a procedure he'd done 1,000 times. "I don't pay you to think, Reed. I pay you to follow orders, and my last order was for you to get out of my trauma bay, now." "But sir, his pressure is about to—" "Out!" he roared, his face turning purple. Harper fell silent and backed away. She watched from the doorway as 30 seconds later, the patient's blood pressure plummeted. The monitors shrieked in alarm. Vance's face went from arrogant confidence to stark panic. He started shouting for pressers, for an X-ray, completely missing the obvious. It was another resident, a quiet, competent woman Vance usually ignored, who finally spotted the tension pneumothorax and prepped the second chest tube, saving the man's life. Vance, recovering his composure, took all the credit. He never acknowledged Harper's warning. To him, she hadn't spoken. She didn't exist. Just before dawn, the world outside the hospital's hermetically sealed environment exploded. The radios crackled to life with news of a massive pileup on the interstate, a multi-vehicle collision involving a jackknifed semi. The first wave of ambulances was 5 minutes out. The relative calm of the ER shattered. A code triage was declared. Staff scrambled, preparing for the influx. Vance was in his glory, a general preparing for battle. He stood in the center of the ER, directing traffic, his voice booming with authority. "Reed! You're on triage in the ambulance bay. Just tag and sort. Don't try to do anything heroic. Point them in the right direction. Can you handle that?" "Yes, doctor," she said, her voice flat. As she walked toward the bay doors, she pulled a fresh pair of gloves from a box. Her hands were still trembling, but as she flexed her fingers, the tremor seemed to recede, replaced by a deep, thrumming energy. The familiar scent of impending chaos was in the air. It smelled like jet fuel and blood and ozone. It smelled like home. The first ambulance screamed into the bay, then the second, then the third. It was a flood of broken bodies and panicked paramedics. Harper moved through the chaos with an eerie calm. Her assessment of each patient was instant, her eyes taking in everything: skin color, respiratory rate, the nature of the injuries. Her tags were placed with swift efficiency: red, yellow, green, black. Her decisions were unerring. A paramedic rushed toward her, pushing a gurney. Middle-aged male, driver of the sedan, massive head trauma, GCS of 3. Harper's eyes swept over the man. His pupils were fixed and dilated. No spontaneous respiration. She placed a black tag on his chest. Dead. The paramedic started to protest. "We just got him out. We can try to—" "His fight is over," Harper said, her voice quiet but absolute. "There are others you can save. Go." There was a finality in her tone that stopped the argument cold. The paramedic nodded and moved on. She directed the stream of wounded with the detached efficiency of an air traffic controller. In the middle of the maelstrom, a black sedan, not an ambulance, screeched to a halt at the edge of the bay. 2 men in dark suits jumped out, opening the back door. They helped a silver-haired man in a torn, bloody business suit onto a gurney they pulled from the car. "Secure channel compromised," one of the agents said into his wrist. "We have to get him inside. Now!" Harper saw the earpieces, the subtle bulges of body armor under their jackets. She saw the look in their eyes, a hyper-vigilance she knew intimately, and she recognized the man on the gurney. Even with the blood and grime, General Marcus Miller was unmistakable, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a man she hadn't seen in 10 years, a man who thought she was dead. She directed them to Trauma Bay, one without a word, her face an unreadable mask. They were being followed. Her instincts screamed it, the way the agents scanned the parking lot, the urgency of their movements. This wasn't just about a car crash. Moments later, her fears were realized. The glass doors to the waiting room exploded inward. 2 men, clad in black tactical gear and carrying short-barreled rifles, stormed into the ER. They moved with professional, fluid grace. One laid down covering fire into the ceiling, sending a shower of acoustic tiles and plaster onto the screaming staff and patients. The other advanced, his weapon sweeping the room. "Nobody moves! Everybody on the floor now!" Panic erupted. Nurses screamed. Patients tried to scramble for cover. Dr. Vance, who had been barking orders a moment before, froze solid. His face went slack with terror, his skin a pasty white. He dropped to the floor behind the nurses' station, whimpering. Jessica followed suit, sobbing hysterically. The lead intruder was tall, built like a linebacker, his face covered by a black balaclava. His eyes, cold and focused, scanned the room. "We're looking for a patient, an important man. Give him to us and we let you live." His partner, younger and more agitated, grabbed the nearest person, the nursing student, Sarah. He pressed the muzzle of his rifle to her temple. "Tell us where he is!" Sarah choked out a terrified sob, unable to speak. Harper was near the supply closet, momentarily out of their direct line of sight. Everything slowed down. The screaming faded into a dull roar. The fluorescent hum was gone, replaced by the pounding of her own heart, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of the world coming into focus. She looked at her hands. They were perfectly still. The tremor was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. The nerve damage was still there, a ghost of a sensation, but the adrenaline, the cold clarity of combat, had overridden it. The mask of the timid 40-year-old nurse dissolved. Her posture straightened, her gaze sharpened, pupils constricting as she drank in every detail of the battle space. 2 hostiles, M4 carbines, short barrels, EO tech sites, professionals, body armor. Target is the general. Primary objective, protect the asset. Secondary objective, neutralize threat. Tertiary objective, minimize collateral damage. The younger gunman shook Sarah, his control slipping. "Where is he?" From the floor, a security guard, a brave but foolish man named Dave, tried to reach for his sidearm. The lead intruder didn't hesitate. A single suppressed phut echoed in the room, and Dave collapsed, a dark, blossoming stain spreading across his chest. He gasped, clutching the wound, blood bubbling from his lips. "The next one is in her head," the leader shouted, gesturing towards Sarah. Dr. Vance stared at the bleeding guard, paralyzed. Oh God, he muttered, his medical knowledge utterly useless in the face of real violence. Harper moved. She didn't run. She flowed from the shadows of the supply closet, her limp gone, replaced by the balanced predatory gait of a hunter. "Stop," she said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the quiet murmur of Nurse Reed. It was a command, low, resonant, and utterly devoid of fear. It cut through the panic like a surgeon's scalpel. Both gunmen turned toward her. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Get on the floor, lady." "You shot that man in the chest," Harper stated, her voice dangerously calm. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on the dying guard. "He has a sucking chest wound. He'll be dead in 90 seconds from a tension pneumothorax if the bleeding doesn't get him first." The leader tilted his head, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "I don't care. Get down." "Let the girl go," Harper continued, ignoring his order. She pointed at Sarah. "She's a non-combatant. You don't want her. Let her go, and I'll help your friend." She nodded toward the younger gunman, who was now sweating heavily, his eyes darting around nervously. "He's running on adrenaline. He's going to make a mistake. You know it, and I know it." The leader hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was the first sign of a crack in his professional armor. He was dealing with something he hadn't expected. In that moment of hesitation, Harper acted. She was already beside the crash cart. In a single, fluid motion, she grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath and a scalpel. She moved to the fallen guard, Dave. "What are you doing?" The leader snarled, raising his rifle. Saving his life, Harper said without looking up. She ripped open Dave's shirt. You want to prove you're in control? Let me do this. A dead guard brings SWAT. A live one buys you time. It was flawless tactical logic. The leader lowered his rifle a fraction of an inch. He was intrigued. He had never seen anything like this. This woman, who looked like a tired, middle-aged nurse, moved with the precision of a surgeon and spoke with the authority of a field commander. Harper located the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Her movements were a blur of economy. She made a small incision with the scalpel, no time for antiseptic, and then plunged the large bore needle into his chest cavity. There was a hiss of escaping air and blood. Dave's agonized breathing immediately eased. That's a needle decompression, she said, her voice a clinical monotone. I just bought him 10 minutes. She looked up, her eyes locking with the leader's. They were the color of glacial ice. Your turn. The younger gunman, unnerved by her cold efficiency, tightened his grip on Sarah. Shut up, just shut up. Look at his trigger discipline, Harper said to the leader, her voice dripping with contempt. His finger's on the trigger. He's got the safety off. He's going to have a negligent discharge. You're a professional. Is he? The leader's gaze flickered to his partner's hands. Harper was right. The kid was a liability. Let the girl go, Harper commanded again, and I will tell you where your target is. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. She needed to separate the girl from the gunman. The leader nodded slowly. Let her go, Mikhail. Mikhail shoved Sarah away. The student scrambled behind a gurney, sobbing. Now it was 2 gunmen against 1 unarmed nurse. The odds seemed impossible. They didn't know who she was. They don't know you're Angel 6, a voice whispered in her mind. They don't know about Kandahar. They don't know about the men you carried out on your back. They don't know. The patient. Where is he? The leader demanded. Harper took a step to her left, subtly changing the angle, putting a heavy steel IV pole between her and Mikhail. He's in trauma 1, but you'll never get to him. And why is that? The leader asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Because you'll have to go through me. The leader laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You and what army? Harper smiled, but it was a terrifying sight. It was all teeth. I am the army. She moved. It wasn't a rush. It was an explosion. She kicked the base of the IV pole. The heavy metal stand, wheels screaming, slammed into Mikhail's knees. He cried out, his legs buckling. As his rifle dipped, Harper was already on him. She didn't go for the weapon. That's what an amateur would do. She went for the man. Her left hand, the one that used to tremble, shot out and struck the side of his neck, her rigid fingers driving deep into the brachial plexus. His entire arm went numb, his grip on the rifle loosening. Her right hand came up, the heel of her palm striking the base of his nose with a sickening crunch. He staggered backward, disoriented, blood pouring from his face. The M4 clattered to the floor. Before he could recover, she grabbed his head, twisting it sharply and slamming it into the steel frame of a nearby gurney. He went down and didn't move. It took less than 3 seconds. The ER was silent, save for the hum of the lights and the whimpering of Dr. Vance. The lead gunman stood frozen, his rifle half raised. He hadn't even processed what had happened. He had just witnessed a middle-aged nurse neutralize his trained partner with brutal surgical efficiency. The amusement was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dawning horror. He was not facing a nurse, he was facing a monster. Who are you? He stammered. Harper kicked the fallen M4 away and picked up a discarded hemostat from the floor, holding it like a blade. Her eyes were flat and lifeless. I'm the person who is going to put you on one of these tables if you don't drop your weapon in the next 5 seconds. 5. She took a step forward. 4. She began to circle him, her movements fluid, forcing him to turn to expose his back to the rest of the room. 3. He saw it then, in the way she moved, in the cold calculus of her eyes. There was no doubt, no fear, only purpose. He was outmatched. 2. He made his choice. He swung his rifle toward General Miller's room, deciding to complete the mission, to go down fighting. It was the wrong choice. He never saw her throw the hemostat. The small steel instrument flew through the air, end over end, and buried its sharp point in the soft tissue of his forearm, right next to the ulnar nerve. His arm spasmed in agony, his fingers uncurling involuntarily. His rifle fell. He screamed and clutched his arm, staring at her in disbelief. Before he could draw his sidearm, a new sound filled the air, the thump, thump, thump of heavy military helicopters descending on the hospital roof. Seconds later, the doors to the ambulance bay burst open. A team of 6 men in black cutting-edge tactical gear swarmed in. They weren't SWAT. Their gear was too advanced, their movements too precise. They carried HK-416 rifles, and on their shoulders were patches that no one in the room recognized. Their commander, a man with a scarred face and the weary eyes of a career soldier, took in the scene. 2 intruders down, a nurse standing over the second one, weaponless but radiating lethal intent. His eyes widened in recognition. "Angel 6, he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Stand down! I repeat, Angel 6, stand down!" The name meant nothing to the hospital staff, but to Harper, it was like a key turning in a lock. The tension flowed out of her. Her shoulders slumped slightly. The glacial ice in her eyes thawed, replaced by a profound weariness. The tactical team secured the 2 intruders with swift, practiced efficiency. The commander walked carefully toward Harper, his rifle lowered. He stopped a few feet away, his expression a mixture of awe and reverence. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, We read the after-action report. It said you were KIA in the Zagros Mountains." Harper shook her head slightly. "The report was wrong," she whispered, her voice returning to its soft murmur. From Trauma Bay 1, General Miller emerged, flanked by his security detail. He was pale and had a makeshift bandage on his head, but his eyes were clear. He stared at Harper, his jaw slack. "Reed," he breathed. "Harper Reed? My God. I signed the commendation myself. The posthumous one." Dr. Vance slowly, shakily, got to his feet. He stared at the scene, his mind unable to comprehend it. The timid, incompetent nurse with the shaky hands was being addressed as a commander by a team of elite soldiers. What is going on?" Vance stammered. "Who is this woman?" The military commander turned his head, his gaze falling on Vance. His eyes were filled with a contempt so pure it was almost a physical force. "This woman," he said, his voice ringing with cold fury, "is Commander Harper Reed, United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She was the senior enlisted leader and chief combat medic for Angel Team 6. He took a step toward the stunned circle of hospital staff. "This woman has 3 silver stars, a Distinguished Service Cross, 4 Purple Hearts. She once performed a field thoracotomy with a Leatherman tool and a coffee straw during a firefight, saving the life of the man who is now the Secretary of Defense." He pointed a gloved finger at Harper. "The limp you probably made fun of? That's from the 18 pieces of shrapnel she took to the leg and back when she shielded 2 of her teammates from an RPG blast in Kandahar. She then proceeded to hold off a dozen enemy fighters for 2 hours, alone, while treating her entire wounded team until reinforcements could arrive." He looked directly at Harper's hands, which had begun to tremble again now that the adrenaline was fading. And her shaky hands. That's not weakness. That's permanent nerve damage from that same blast. Damage she sustained while saving lives. She has spilled more blood saving this country than you have in your entire Ivy League career, Doctor. The ER was utterly silent. Jessica stared at Harper, her face ashen with shame. Greg looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah, the nursing student, simply gazed at Harper with wide, tear-filled eyes full of awe. The commander turned back to Harper. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture ramrod straight. He raised his hand in a sharp, formal salute. "It is an honor, ma'am," he said. One by one, every member of his elite team turned to face Harper and saluted. General Miller, one of the most powerful men in the military, straightened his torn suit and rendered a slow, respectful salute of his own. Dr. Vance just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. His entire world, his entire sense of superiority and hierarchy, shattered into a million pieces. He had mocked a hero. He had berated and humiliated a legend. In the space of 10 minutes, he had been reduced from the king of his domain to a pathetic, cowardly fool. Harper looked at the saluting soldiers, at the awestruck faces of the ER staff, and finally at Dr. Vance. She saw the ruin in his eyes. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel anger. She just felt tired. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the commander, a silent acknowledgement. Then she turned, her limp more pronounced now, and walked over to the supply cart she'd been stocking hours before. She picked up a packet of sterile gauze. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She walked over to the security guard, Dave, who was now being tended to by paramedics. She knelt beside him and began to gently, expertly, clean the wound around the needle in his chest. Her work was done. The noise was over. She was just a nurse again, but no one in that room would ever see her as just a nurse again. They had seen the angel inside the ghost. They had witnessed the quiet, unassuming woman with the shaky hands reveal a core of pure, unbreakable steel. They had laughed at her perceived weakness, and she had shown them a strength they could barely comprehend. And in the humming silence of the now secure ER, they finally understood. The quietest people often have the loudest histories.